Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Thursday, February 1st. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris, continuing and closing out our position preview series for the 2024 fantasy baseball season. And appropriately, we're closing it out with relievers. It's amazing. It's almost like somebody planned that.
It wasn't me.
I spend a lot of time in spreadsheets. I spend a lot of time in rundowns. Eno spends a lot of time in spreadsheets. He does not spend a lot of time in
rundowns. I look.
We have a doc. You actually do open it. You do read it. That is actually probably above average prep work compared to the overall body of folks I have worked with over the entire scope of my career. It does seem like something that's gotten better over time. People are a little more into the rundown than they were back when podcasting started.
For all of our listeners, not to too much of how the sausage is made, one of the things that we're kind of excited about this year is doing a little bit more on YouTube. And I know you might be listening to this as you walk, and YouTube requires kind of looking at a screen, and that's not ideal for some of you, but we're going to be doing more sort of visualizations. You saw in that last picture pod that we had, an overlay with some actual visuals, and that requires a little bit of work. Requires looking at the rundown and thinking ahead of time. But adding that visual component to this podcast could be something exciting for everybody as we kind of try to, demonstrate and show you the things that we're looking at when we're talking about these things.
Yeah, exactly. It's nice to have the option to see it. If you're out walking the dog, YouTube might not be the best way to consume it. The old podcast route might be the way to go. But if you're inside, stuck in the living room, stuck in the basement, got something going on in the background, the visuals can be pretty helpful. So be sure to check us out on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button on this video. Drop us a nice rating and review for the podcast. If you haven't done that already, we really appreciate 5-star reviews. It makes our bosses happy. And when they're happy, things tend to go pretty well for us. So we really appreciate everybody who's done that and everybody who will do that. Let's begin at the top of the reliever board. This is outside the first 2 rounds of a 15-team league. Typically, you're going to see pick 35-ish is when that first closer might come off the board. That's an NFBC style approach. Draft and holds are very popular this time of year. If you can't make moves in season for saves, you have to make sure you get them in the draft. So I think that gives a little bit of a nudge to some of the elite guys in this particular format. But the top 5 relievers this year, in some order, tend to go off Devin Williams, Edwin Dîaz, Josh Hader, Emmanuel Clase, and Jhoan Duran. And all 5 of them are great for different reasons. I am curious, just from a broader perspective, are you living in this range? We talk about opportunity cost a lot. If you draft a closer in round 3 or round 4, you're giving up a lot in terms of that starting pitcher, that bat, whatever it is you could be looking at otherwise. Those are all quality players too. So have you been living in this tier so far?
In draft and holds, I will, because you don't have free agency. You don't have that ability to add closers. I think there's something like 30% of saves is the number I believe that Jeff Zimmerman found. 30% of saves in any given year are on the waiver wire, after the draft is finished. But in draft and hold, you have no access to those. So all of a sudden, the amount of saves you could get shrinks by 1/3. And so, given that, I want one stud that I think I can hold on to, put my hands around and have as a source of save. Sometimes just having one closer and ending the season with 30 saves instead of 5 or 10 can win you a league.
Because you might get 4 or 5 standings points instead of 1 or 2.
Yeah,
makes a huge difference.
I think as it gets, as the league differs, if you add free agency, I want to get the last one of this tier. I'm not like trying to be so certain I get one of these. I will just take the one that falls to me. That's something like I think in this case sometimes it's Hader. I guess you're saying by ADP it's Duran. I would jump all over that. Hader actually has the weakest stuff plus and the weakest projection. All these guys have ERA projections using stuff plus that start with 2, except for Hader. It's a 311. It's a 350. It might be okay, but if you just want to see the top of the PPERA, you've got Dîaz, Muñoz is my secret tier 1. So I'm in a 10-team league. I could wait all the way to Muñoz because I see that 2.52 ERA. He added a sinker late in the season. I see a lot of stuff to love there. But Duran, if he's the last guy in this tier in a 10-team league, yeah, give me him. And I can wait to, I don't know, what is the 4th or something, maybe to get him. So just want one of that top tier because those are innings too, and they're awesome innings. So you can't just say it's just saves. You're talking about, I might get 60 to 70 innings I might even get a 60 to 70 innings of a ERA that starts with 1, and I might get 100 strikeouts. Like that's how good these guys are. So I might get 100 strikeouts in these 60 innings. That could be that is just really valuable. So I do want one of these guys.
Yeah, if you break the glass in this group, let's say you take the first closer off the board, is Edwin Dîaz your choice? Because it seems like he's the most popular of the bunch, even though a torn ACL that he suffered in the World Baseball Classic kept him out for the entire 2023 season.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't an arm injury, and I know, other people have struggled with knee injuries and it's been going on, but like he was close to coming back. And there was some discussion that if they'd gone to the playoffs, he could have come back. And there was some noise that he might, pitch a little bit at the end of the season, and then they shut him down. With a knee injury and a full year off, like I feel like he'll be fine.
Yeah, I'm with you on Dîaz. If it were an arm injury, it'd be completely different because it's not. No problem taking him as the first closer off the board. I go Dîaz Williams as my first 2. I think as long as Devin Williams is healthy, he's clearly the guy. We see the elite of the elite K rate, 37.7% last year. It's the best on the rundown from the first 4 tiers today. And these are guys that generally miss a ton of bats. So it's just a slight health risk. I think we've talked about the way he throws that airbender, kind of that over pronation look. It just seems like it puts a lot of strain on his arm. So far, so good for him, though.
He's had some missed time in the minors that doesn't necessarily show up in the majors. Some missed time in the majors. And then you just I hate to play this game because there's so few people that throw basically a screwball like he throws, but the other people who have thrown screwballs, Brent Honeywell, I think Jake Faria has that, big pronation, the exaggerated pronation, Hector Santiago, they do not have good, clean bills of health. And Dallas Braden basically threw a screwball, and he said his shoulder was so nasty that when Dr. James Andrews saw it, he said it was the worst he'd ever seen.
That's not an award you would want.
Dude, Braden has some stories, dude. Oh, they the medical world was not kind to him.
We'll have to get to that in a future episode, I think, because that could be a really, really deep rabbit hole. As far as Hader goes, he really does push the limits for walks, 13% walk rate. Plenty of these elite closers are above 10, but he's trending in the wrong direction. You see that kind of erratic command, even though he still throws really hard. I was really surprised that Houston signed him. We talked about that a bit last week. I think he's fine within this group, unless you think Ryan Pressly kind of carves out a small committee role where it's 8 to 10 of the saves that would have gone to Hader go to Pressly. I don't think that's like that. I think it's more Pressly might go on a day where Hader's unavailable if Pressly himself is available. But I see Pressly being the last piece in the bridge to Hader. So if Hader's not going, Pressly's probably not going that day either. And it's someone like Abreu or someone else who has to pop up and clean up the occasional save if they've got 3 in a row or something along those lines.
Yeah, amazingly, both Abreu and Pressly have better projections than Hader. I've got Brian Abreu with a 141 stuff. It's an LOL type thing with a 297 projection. I have Ryan Pressly with a 144, which is sort of amazing given his age, and a 279 projection. And Hader has a 111 with a 354 projection. I kind of think they didn't consult their analytics team on this one.
That kind of seems like the Astros lean, though. It seems like Jim Crane is being a little more hands-on with moves, right? I mean, they had Jose Abreu last offseason, and a lot of us said, that doesn't seem like an Astros thing. And then you see like Jeff Bagwell quotes around it. You're like, oh, the old first baseman signed the old first baseman, or one of the old first basemen. Huh, how about that? So, it is a little bit unusual in that regard too. I think you could pretty easily bump Duran ahead of Hader, just because when you watch Jhoan Duran, it's just pure filth. His splinker might be the nastiest pitch in the entire league.
Yeah. And in fact, I would have Hader last, except for the fact that Muñoz has had some injury history and doesn't have the track record. And also in Seattle may have someone behind him that could take the role, that could do the role. I don't know if as well as him, but we'll talk about that later. But
yeah, they do have a nice bullpen there as well. I think the other question here, if you bump Duran up, you say he's third, fourth best in this tier. Emmanuel Clase, the strikeouts were gone last year. We've talked about it at least once or twice before. I mean, this is paying top dollar for job security. This is a guy who's still under that contract extension for 3 more seasons with 2 club options on top of that. So the Guardians can really do anything they want because they've got cost control on Clase. Throws really hard. You'd think he'd strike more guys out, but even his career strikeout rate, it's like 24.9%. We saw a 21.2% last year. If he dips from there, there is job loss potential because he starts to become hittable enough where bad stuff's going to happen. Someone else could emerge to be the option. Of the projection systems at Fangraphs, I think only the bat has a K percentage as low as what Clase did last year. Most of their systems are nudging him back closer to that career mark. So, where do you stand on Clase? Do you think this 2023 K rate's a little bit of an outlier and things are generally going to be fine for him as one of the safer closers on the board?
Yeah, we have the highest projected strikeout rate with our Stuff Plus based projections that Jordan Rosenblum created, and we've got a 27% strikeout rate for him. That's higher than any other projection system. So I'm in on him. Plus, one thing that you found historically with big velo is that it suppresses home run rate and it suppresses batting average on balls in play, which actually is kind of funny when you think about it, because we just talked about on one of those pitcher podcasts that we found that Stuff Plus affects BABIP and home runs. So there's a link there because velo is an important part of stuff. So you see a 0.42 home run rate for his career and a 0.264 BABIP for his career for Clase. Those aren't by accident. It's filthy. It may not come with the same strikeout rate as a Dîaz or a Williams or even a Muñoz, but it's safe. It's real nice and safe, I think. I don't think he's going to lose the job.
Incredibly difficult to square up. So yeah, I think things look pretty good for Emmanuel Clase as well. Really cool that you've got the highest K rate projection on there. I like to hear the sound of that because you don't like to lose anything in any category when you draft a reliever this early. So it feels a little strange when you see how that stacks up to the other guys, even in tiers 2 and 3. Really, you see consistently better K rates than what Clase did last season. Let's move down to tier 2. This is more like the pick 50 to 75 range. You can kind of tell that there's this momentum that occurs in a draft where that first run happens, and many of the teams that don't have a closer yet kind of have the, I got to get a closer if I really want one, especially in draft and hold. This group includes Camilo Doval, Raisel, Iglesias, David Bednar, Jordan Romano, and Alexis Dîaz. Kind of interesting that Andrés Muñoz, who you really like, still isn't even in this tier yet. He's actually going to be in tier 3, so we'll get to him in detail here in just a couple of minutes.
Opportunity right there.
I mean, these are very
early
soft
ADP
walls, very low walls. They can be scaled quite easily. They're kind of like the Ninja Warrior walls. Like, people can just find a way over them pretty quickly. Doval, I think
things will change. I mean, it's super early in the system. Not only are we, picking our favorites and other pods picking their favorites, but we'll get into spring training and people will ask the manager, is Muñoz your closer? He'll say yes. And then Muñoz immediately gets, a round bump or whatever.
Yeah. And there are some sharp fantasy baseball players I know who don't bother with their prep until after the Super Bowl, and we're not there yet. So there's also that. There's still more people who are going to dive into the pool with their own ideas and ranks and things that will shake things up even further. But Doval is in this group. He's atop the bunch in terms of ADP. if his command got just a little bit better, I could see him making the leap to top 5 status. I think he's already shown a little bit more consistency. Thing I've always liked about him, though, he just looks so calm, even when things aren't going well, even when he can't land the fastball or the slider where he wants to. It seems like he's always got one of those pitches working, and it's just enough. And beyond that, the Giants have really kind of settled in using him as a true closer, or at least a primary closer, whereas a little earlier in his career, it was really unclear how Gabe Kapler at the time was going to manage that bullpen.
Yeah, something weird happened where they were on pace to use him close to 80 innings. I mean, the first half, he had 41 innings and a 2.63 ERA. In the second half, he had 26 innings and a 3.38 ERA. And there's some of the discourse of just like, oh, we're not using him enough. And I'm like, I doubt that's it. In fact, the way I read it from watching him and sort of, noticing his use was that I thought he was tired. And if you look at his velo charts in April and May, he was, you can see it in a slider velo. Can I switch this to something? It's just showing me his slider velo. That's all right. It's still a good proxy. His slider was 90 miles an hour in April and May. His slider in October was 85 in his last appearance. So I think they used him really hard. And I know he gets a full season off, and maybe they won't use him as hard, and they didn't use him as hard in the second half. So, maybe they saw something themselves. On the same time, fatigue is fatigue. It can lead to future injury. And this is kind of a scouting thing where I'm just like, he looked tired to me. He is, though, a baby Clase. In terms of like huge velo, a fastball that cuts, a good hard slider. He's like, he strikes out a few more than Clase. But it's that kind of package. He's got a .61 home run per 9, a decent BABIP. So I think he's fine where he goes. And if you do miss out and you want to get in, I see some traps in this tier, and he's not necessarily one of them.
Oh, I'm curious to know which of these other guys. If you see more than one trap, you see more traps than I do, because I see one that's easy to avoid at the back of the group. Alexis Dîaz is the most wobbly of the bunch. Makes sense that he goes the latest of the bunch. But who's the other trap?
Yeah, Alexis Dîaz also had a second half velocity swoon that I hadn't noticed.
Yeah, it's a sharp drop.
Look at this on YouTube or on Brooks Baseball if you'd like. We're talking in 2022. He had a month where he was 96.5. And even late 22, he was sitting 96. He never sat higher than 95.2 in 2023. And in August of 2023, he was down to 94. So this is a concerning graph if you see the whole shape of it. He did bounce back a little bit in December, but still not up to 95. And so I am concerned about Alexis Dîaz's second half ERA. That was like 2 runs higher too. And when you see that alongside the velo, and you know that relievers are tied to their velo, relievers production is tied to their velo like much more than it is for starters. So that's one trap. The other trap is Raisel Iglesias, who has the worst stuff plus of any of the closers that we ranked in the top 30. I've got a ranking coming out tomorrow. He has the worst stuff plus of any of the closers that end up on our rankings. And with a 3.54 projection, ERA projection, the worst projection, I guess tied with Hader, the worst projection of anybody that we've seen, whose name we've seen so far. Now, that's not a terrible projection, 354, but you think about it, and you think about how good AJ Minter is, and even Joe Jimenez, and you've got options if you're the Braves. And if Iglesias stumbles at all, I could see Minter just taking over, because Joe Jimenez is a lefty, and so you don't need Minter as a lefty.
No, Jimenez is a righty. But
Jimenez is a righty.
I think they did have another lefty in that pen though, right?
They got Ray Kerr from the Padres.
Bummer. That was the other lefty they added. Yeah. So they've got Minter and Bummer.
Oh, and Kerr.
and Kerr. But yeah. But
so they have other lefties in that bullpen. They don't need Minter as like kind of a situational lefty.
Right.
So I think Minter could take this role this year. I mean, Minter is nasty. These are great strikeout rates, great stuff. The command problem he had early in his career is gone. So I'm all over Minter.
I think I'm less worried about Iglesias this year. I think we're starting to see the signs of aging. I think there's a good chance he can keep it for one more season. It's a good point, though. The quality in Atlanta's bullpen gives them plenty of ready-made replacements at their disposal. The issue for me would be home runs for Iglesias. We've seen that pop up on a few occasions. We saw it in his only full season with the Angels. We saw it last year in the closer role with Atlanta. So we're starting to see, I think, small warts. He doesn't miss quite as many bats as some of the guys that go ahead of him, but he's also got better control than a lot of those guys. So I'm okay with Iglesias. I think he's in my circle of trust at this point. Dîaz is nowhere near it, just by comparison. I don't see it with Alexis Dîaz. I think the velocity chart was one reason for it. He had 37 saves last year, while nobody else in the pen had more than 3. So I think the only argument I could make against myself is who's a threat to his job? Like, who's Cincinnati going to throw out there? I think I've besmirched that bullpen before. I like Sims a little bit, but that walk rate's disgusting. I mean, so I just think they don't necessarily have their next man up that's so good. Like, Dîaz has to be really bad to lose the job. Iglesias could have a couple of bad outings, and because of the Braves trying to be the best team in the National League, maybe there's a quicker decision to make a change. I could understand that argument, but I think Iglesias is actually pretty solid in this group. I imagine what you said about Iglesias means you like both David Bednar and Jordan Romano more than Iglesias from this bunch.
Yes, I definitely do. And I actually even have Iglesias in my 3rd tier.
Wow.
So I put Bednar, Doval, and Romano on equal footing. They all have basically 3-3 projections and 120 stuff plus. So just find guys. And for what it's worth, don't think that, Bednar on the Pirates won't get any saves. He had 39 last year.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of an overcorrection for save chances on below average or bad teams. The Pirates are bad. They're not bad. They're below average, and they're at least on the rise. I would say a team like Oakland last year, you look at a truly disastrous team.
Saves that they have.
Colorado most years, you look at those teams and you say, okay, these teams are so unbelievably bad that they are going to be even a notch below a typical below average team. And they also did such a terrible job in many cases stacking up enough quality relievers that it's a crapshoot for who gets saves.
Amazingly, Oakland still, as bad as they were, still had 29 saves. But what does happen is, like Pittsburgh, as an example, had 47 saves. So you always expect that no matter what the team save number is, the leader is below that. And, so 29 saves means that tops in that pen might have 22 saves if it was, and it was that way. Trevor May had 21 saves, and I guess that's useful, but if you're putting him up against everybody else getting 30 and 35, then you're behind your peers.
Right. It's so weird when you look at the team save leaderboard, which I should spend more time looking at in the winters. The Rangers, the team that won the World Series, 4th from the bottom. They only had 30 saves. Most of the teams on the bottom, Royals, White Sox, A's, Rockies, those are teams that we didn't have high expectations for the most part. White Sox would be an outlier within that group. They just had a disastrous season. The Mets, being like 5-6 from the bottom, that's kind of a surprise. I mean, they didn't have Dîaz, but they weren't supposed to be a bad team last year. They sold at the deadline, so that didn't help. The Cubs had a winning record. They only had 35. Padres had a winning record. They only had 36. So yeah, it's a funny little thing where it's not always a case where the below average teams fail to generate save opportunities. The argument I've heard that resonates with me is those teams don't score a ton of runs. When they do win, they don't win by more than 3. They usually create save chances by virtue of not blowing teams out very often.
And there's a fair amount of noise. So, if you look at the bottom there, Texas had 2.6 wins above replacement from their bullpen. Oakland was below replacement, and Texas only had 1 more save. So that says to me a little bit of luck, right? Like a little bit of like, oops, you blew some, even though it was a more quality pen than Oakland had. And you can even go up the chain where the Angels had 43 saves and they only got 0.6 wins from their bullpen. So that's kind of luck in the other direction for that bullpen, not necessarily for the entire team. And then Washington Nationals had 42 saves and a 0.6 WAR from their bullpen. So, I used to think that yes, a good bullpen can hand the closer more save opportunities. And so if it's just an awful bullpen, sometimes I do want to just be like, I don't want a part of it. But, Washington, by wins above replacement, at least Washington was one of the 3 worst bullpens last year and still got, 40 plus saves.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's actually a few buying opportunities with some of these teams that we'll get to here in the lower tiers. As far as Bednar goes, I think he's one of the most underrated closers in the game outside of fantasy circles. We've known who Bednar is for a long time in these parts, but career 30% K rate, 265 ERA, 111 whip. I mean, he's just good across the board. I like him a little more than Jordan Romano. The velo is holding up okay. The K rate is down a little bit from where it was when Romano broke out back in 2021. A little surge in fly balls maybe could make him a little more vulnerable to homers, but ultimately, this looks like a really nice profile. I wonder if Nate Pearson is actually the biggest threat to Jordan Romano in the long run, because Nate Pearson looks pretty darn good in the bullpen.
Yes, in some drafting holes, I actually took Nate Pearson this year. So, Romano's velocities had some weird home away splits and just a little bit of softness. And if you think about his career, like he had a big velo jump when he went to relief, but like, he had a big velo jump at one point. And you kind of just wonder if that's going to stick around forever. So it's picking the nits with him. Like I'm totally fine with Romano, Bednar, and Doval are just, I've got no real problems. And, it's an argument. I think even in like a 15 team league, like you can drop to these guys. Yeah. What are you really losing? For me, I feel like you're getting close to 30% strikeout rates from Romano, Bednar, and Doval. According to our projections, you're getting a 3 ERA instead of like a 2.5, 2.6. So you are losing something, but is it a big drop? I mean, I think and they all seem fairly safe in their roles. And so even if Bednar gets traded, like, doesn't he get traded to be a closer?
There's a good chance. Yeah, he'd still end up closing for his new team in a bunch of outcomes. Because there's a couple teams that are really good that don't necessarily have a clear option that stacks up with these top 2 tiered relievers. Let's move on to tier 3. I split this part into 2
these
groups.
Guys in my tier 2.
Yeah, so tier 3 is pretty big by ADP. It's more than just the guys on the screen right now. It's Paul Sewald, Peter Fairbanks, Andrés Muñoz, Ryan Helsley, Tanner Scott, Evan Phillips, Craig Kimbrel, Clay Holmes, Kenley Jansen, and Adbert Alzolay. So you could cut it in half and say, well, the first group is like 80 to 100 in terms of where they tend to go, and the next group's 100 to 120. There's a lot of movement in this range. Depending on how aggressive the room is, you can see some of these guys creep up a little bit. So that's why I figured it was better to just lump them all together.
I have like a couple tier 4s in here. I have a tier 1 in here. I have a couple tier 2s in here. Like this is that just represents like a great buying opportunity, especially. Like if you could tell me that I could come out of a draft with Andrés Muñoz as my second closer, I would feel like I would have a better pen than anybody else.
Is that a strategy you would only typically execute in draft and hold, or would you actually do that in a league with moves to avoid having to try throwing a bunch of fab at saves later on? Because that could give you a different sort of strength, right? If you're not chasing saves throughout the season, if you're not trying to make 3-digit bids on relievers that start to pop, you could be more aggressive with prospect call-ups. You could be more aggressive with streamers, with 2-start pitchers.
Also, if you have a short bench, I've spent time with a reliever on my bench that's sort of like this guy could become a closer, and so I'm it's like a prospect. I'm holding on to this guy to become a closer, which means if you have 7 bench spots, now you have 6 because you've got one reliever that's always hanging around because you need saves. Whereas if you just have 2 really great ones, you may not even have to think about it. This one falls into your lap kind of deal. So yeah, I think it's a decent idea. I also think in like some 10 and 12 team leagues, especially like head to head, it's not a bad idea to have it as a strength, especially if you have one of these leagues that's like 2 starting pitcher slots, 2 reliever pitcher slots, and then like 4 Ps. Like, think about it. Like, that's 4 you could do anything with. Like, it'd be, what if you had, you came out of the draft with Jhoan, Duran, and Andrés Muñoz in those 2 RP slots. Then you buy a bunch of starting pitchers, and then you kind of get all these sleeper, and then all of a sudden you have like, 5 closers in a 10-team league. Like, that's going to blow people out of the water in a couple categories. You could start to maybe do one of these low innings pitch strategies where you just come out there with a bunch of relievers, win ERA, win saves, win whip, and try to stay competitive in wins and Ks. If you have that many Ks from your closers, like, you may actually be able to stay competitive.
Yeah, definitely possible. So this group turns into a little bit more of a mixed bag, right? You've got Paul Sewald, who I think filled a really clear need for an upgrade in Arizona bullpen after the Diamondbacks acquired him midseason. Turns 34 in May. I mean, it's more funk than velocity, so I think he'll continue to age pretty well. I don't see major threats to his role in Arizona right now, so I think Sewald is fine where he's going. The problem I have is when I look at especially Muñoz, who will probably creep up. I definitely like Muñoz more than Sewald, and I like Ryan Helsley more than Sewald too. Ryan Helsley had a 24% K- BB, 5th among all the relievers in these first 4 tiers we're going to talk about today. Consecutive years now with just fantastic ratios. They sometimes share that role. Giovanni Gallegos had a shoulder injury, so there's a little bit of a question there.
Issues.
Yeah, but I could see Helsley being their first 30-save closer since Trevor Rosenthal, who got the 48 all the way back in 2015.
Wow, that's a good pool. I totally see him as a tier 1 guy. He's a tier 2 guy for me, and my favorite on this list in front of us. Although I would say that Pete Fairbanks, on an inning per inning basis, and when you look at projections, you fall in love with him. So I've got a 2.46 ERA for him and a 3.09 for Helsley. I've got a 34% strikeout rate projected for Pete Fairbanks. But this is when he's healthy, and that's when you fall in love with him, and then you draft him, and you're like, oh man, he's on the IL again. So I don't know how much to ding a closer for health risk. It's already hard enough with starting pitchers, but with a starting pitcher, the on-off switch is: am I going to get 200 innings or like 0 from this guy? Whereas for Fairbanks, the most you're going to get anyway is 60 innings. So you're also risking a lower pick. So, if Fairbanks is going to be your 3rd closer, then thumbs up, dude.
Yeah.
If he's your 2nd closer, I'm still in. If he's your 1st closer, you waited.
You did, and I think by skills, you're right. I'm with you on the projections. He hasn't worked 50 innings in a season as a reliever before. I think really early in his career, he was a starter in the minor leagues. He got up over 100 way back then, but he's had a ton of different injuries. If I remember correctly, he got hurt dunking in the pool over his kid. It's an unusual injury that will teaching his kid a lesson, I guess, but hurting himself in the process.
Yeah.
25 saves
I think
last
Dad
year.
got taught a lesson too.
Yeah, I think so. Fairbanks had 25 saves last season. It actually tied Sergio Romo for the most in a season for the Rays going back to 2018.
Wow.
They have 3 20-save seasons in the last 5 full years. Emilio Pagan, I think, has the other one, and just 6 seasons with 10+ saves. They spread it around a little bit, but some of that is just breaking guys. Like, their willingness to build around the likes of Fairbanks and their bullpen just means someone gets hurt, someone else picks up the job. So
it limits his upside. He was the 24th best reliever according to the auction calculator last year.
I think if Muñoz and Helsley were gone, and I already had one reliever, and I felt like I needed that second one, either because there's going to be another run, maybe I didn't like the other players where I was kind of positioned in a snake draft, I'd be okay taking Fairbanks. I just like him more as a 2 than as a 1 because it may be closer to 20 saves than the 30+ you really want from that first closer that you put on your roster. How do you compare him to Tanner Scott? Because Tanner Scott's interesting. Got 20 saves in 2022, had fewer saves last year, only had 12, but everything just looked better. He cut his walk rate in half. He went from extreme walk problems at 15.9% down to 7.7%. His always had premium velocity. It's a really nice fastball slider combo. Are you a believer in Tanner Scott? Do you think that the Marlins are comfortable letting him just be the closer from start to finish this season?
Yeah. So there's like a blessing and a curse that comes with the fact that stuff is more sticky year to year than command. The blessing is you can pick up Tanner Scott on the cheap, when he has a terrible walk rate, and then he might pop for you, the next year. The curse is, I don't know how much to believe that he had one of the worst location pluses of any reliever, the last 2 years. And then this year, all of a sudden he's above average. And no matter what, I'm baking regression in. And so, maybe with regression, he can still be good. It's interesting to see him run these 15 and 16% walk rates in 21 and 2022, go down to 7.8%. And then the projections are like, yeah, something's changed. And they're at 10 and 9 and not, the bat says 11. And what if it's 12 or 13? That's just as plausible given his history. His career rate is 12.7. Why isn't it 12.7? And so I also see other options in that pen. And so I'm not going to say that like I'm fully out on Scott. There's situations where I'll take him, but I would much rather have Muñoz and Fairbanks and Helsley. And I bet you if you split this over to the next part of the screen, what's the next part of the tier? I have one or two names here that I would take over him too. Yeah, I think I have two names on this part. So this is Evan Phillips and Clay Holmes. I think I would take over Tanner Scott. Yeah.
Okay. I think that makes sense in part based on the usage for Scott. What changes too, I didn't make the visual before the show because I didn't look at the map ahead of time, but his entire heat map, which was pretty blurry, like way outside the zone, big blob in 2022, just got tighter with both the four-seamer and the slider. So it does look like something changed.
Maybe
with
you're
him.
just like throw it down the middle, dude.
Maybe it was more, simplifying the targets. Maybe there was some kind of off-season program. Like I would love to know more about how he did it, because I had Tanner Scott kind of just in this permanent bucket of electric arm, no idea where it's going, can't trust them. And I've missed out in season last year. I even missed out in 2022 for those 20 saves. And now I'm looking at him and saying, yeah, it makes sense. There's a lot of things that are good. I would say Phillips, Holmes, maybe Adbert, Alzolay also would be someone I'm a little more comfortable with. I think that's where the toss-up would actually come in, like trying to decide if everything is going to be there this year for Alzolay. He had an injury last year, an elbow injury. I think that slowed him down just a little bit in the second half. But everything looked so good. 5 Ks to every walk. He has to get a little better against lefties if he's going to become truly like an elite closer. But he just looks really, really solid right now. And I think that's the thing within this kind of sub-tier is that Phillips and Holmes and Alzolay all just look like they're pretty safe by skills. It's just a question of whether or not someone else comes along that has the capital C closer in their past that can bump them off that spot.
There were
if the Yankees traded for Bednar mid-season, would he close over Clay Holmes? If the Dodgers traded for Bednar, would he close over Evan Phillips?
Yeah, I think so. But so that's the scary part, is other people being, coming in on trade. So Emmanuel Clase trade rumors were a little bit scary, and those were tied specifically to the Cubs. But Clase to the Dodgers, I think, would make sense. Like in terms of that's the only part of their team that's not like super goosed. And the Yankees have always tried to have amazing pens, but I think even with Clay Holmes, they have a pretty good pen, because I like Jonathan Loaizaga. I like Ian Hamilton. I like a fair amount of those guys in that pen. And, I like some of those guys in draft and holds just for wins and holds and, and ERA and innings. If you throw that leaderboard up again that we threw up earlier about, if you see on here, Pete Fairbanks, number 2 in projected ERA, but there's Clay Holmes with a sub-3 projected ERA. And Tanner Scott. So, of course, a stuff-based projection system loves him. It's only me, flawed human being, not the model. I am not the embodiment of the model. who is worried about the command. so maybe trust the cold hard facts. But Clay Holmes still has stuff wise what he takes. I think he's also finding ways to mitigate his flaws. So like he had this flaw that he's a big right-handed sinker slider guy that, how do I get lefties out? And it was kind of sinker sweeper. So it's like, oh, you have the pitches with the two biggest platoon splits. How do you get lefties out? And he tried to convince me, no, it's okay. Like, there are people who've thrown sinkers to lefties and had success. And I looked it up and, like Jared Hughes is on the list. I mean, I don't know. He's cool, but I don't know if, you want Jared Hughes as your closer. So like, I was like, I'm not sure, dude, like you're kind of on an island there. So what he did over the course of last season was develop a gyro slider. So a hard bullet slider. And so he's really a 3-pitch pitcher, masquerading as 2. And you can lead with that hard gyro slider because it's a little bit platoon neutral. It's just a bullet. It's just a seed. And so you can play off that. So if you use that as your fastball, he basically can pitch backwards against lefties. And I think he'll regain. He already kind of regained it, but I think he'll sort of regain like he is the closer kind of feeling over the course of spring.
Are you taking Holmes over Phillips if that's what you're kind of looking at the top of the queue?
No, because I think Phillips is just safer right now. I don't think they want to go to Brusdar Graterol because he does allow balls in play more than Phillips does. And also bringing Graterol in with the best hitters at the plate and maybe a batter on base in the 7th inning to basically close the game is something that I think that the Dodgers love to do.
As far as the olds go, we didn't say a lot about Paul Sewald. He goes a little earlier than the other two, but Kimbrel and Jansen still kind of hanging around, doing their thing. Jansen, the second of a 2-year deal with the Red Sox, showing a few more warts at this stage of his career. Not at all surprising. We wondered if there'd be some pitch clock problems here, given his pacing in the past. Had the second worst ERA, 3.63, and the worst whip at 1.28 of his career, and the K rate fell below 30%. So Kenley Jansen doesn't quite look like that guy anymore, but still seems like he's relatively trusted because of the track record. Would you end up with either one of Jansen or Kimbrel, whose regular season numbers were pretty good? It's the postseason struggles that are just etched in everybody's mind.
The park is helping Kimbrel, and the stuff is better for Kimbrel. In a related manner, Jordan Rosenblum did an aging curve for Stuff Plus and found that at the ages that they're at, you're losing as much as 3 to 4 points on your Stuff Plus in a given year. And that makes sense given what we know about fastball velo aging curves and how they start to accelerate in your late 30s and early 40s. So these guys are still tied to their velo. Jansen is trying to become like kind of a wide arsenal closer, maybe trying to kind of Raisel Iglesias it up where he's going to be a funky closer that has many pitches. But I still prefer big velo, big secondary, Craig Kimbrel kind of approach.
There's a massive drop after this group. There's like a 40 to 50 pick range where you don't really see closers go. So if you don't have one, and then these are the guys at the top of the queue, it's kind of important to try and find the one that you feel the best about. But I'm with you on the two that stand out. Phillips and Holmes make a lot of sense. Alzolay, if he's healthy, I think has some potential to take at least a small step forward again here.
The deeper it gets into spring without a Clase trade, then less likely it happens too.
Right. So I think at price, I have no problem taking him. Ideally as a second closer, where it's a 15-team league and you waited, maybe he's your first, which is going to force you to shop aggressively in the fringe options and try and find some value. Tier 4, I've got 2 screens worth here. Jose Alvarado, Jose Leclerc, Alex Lange, Mason Miller, plus Carlos Estévez, Kyle Finnegan, and Robert Suarez. It starts to dry up pretty quickly. Alvarado, to me, is the one that just doesn't belong. He's the first one that goes. I could see him kind of floating up into that empty space where there are no closers, kind of in the pick 150 range. Maybe he doesn't get all the way up to Adbert Alzolay's ADP, but he's probably not that far behind. And the reason is a couple things. Number one, Craig Kimbrel is gone. He had 23 saves last year in the regular season. So there's a large share of saves available. Alvarado was getting saves last year, even when Kimbrel was around, part of the mix for them. And now we're looking at 2 seasons with improved control for Alvarado. So if we didn't trust it last year, a second season where he's kept that walk rate in check, keeping it more in line with a typical elite closer, that should give you some more confidence. This is a skill that he now possesses. Alvarado led all closers in strikeout minus walk rate last season. You're going to count him as a closer, 26.7%. Basically, he's got the Pete Fairbanks strikeout and walk rates with less injury risk. I like that. And he's had a great team. So what do you think the concerns are with Alvarado specifically? I mean, I know they can mix and match. They've got other flamethrowers in the bullpen. Orion Kirkering's going to get a mention at some point during the show later on. But that's a guy that pitched at like 4 different levels last year before a really late debut. Alvarado's been a big leaguer for a long time and now has these elite skills 2 years running.
Yeah. My own concern is that, Alvarado was there and they brought in Craig Kimbrel. It's like they are trying to build a massive hard throwing bullpen. And I just don't know that they're going to solidify around him as their closer. You know what I'm saying? Like he could be it. Jeff Hoffman had bonkers stuff numbers. Like he grew 3 miles per hour in the fastball and like 6 miles an hour in the slider. And he had the best stuff plus in that bullpen. So Anthony Dominguez didn't have a great year, but the stuff was still there. Gregory Soto had better stuff than Jose Alvarado last year by stuff plus. And I think that's even true after the revision. So it's not some weird, he's the lefty and we're dinging him too much. He had a 109 stuff plus, and then he got revised to 108. So Alvarado is who he is. And I do think he's a good closer and a good pitcher, and he could be a good closer. I just don't know who the closer is. That's it. I just don't know who the closer is. And maybe as spring comes and they ask the manager a couple of times, maybe I'll believe him. But managers also lie.
They do. The other thing that I think is interesting is that they weren't passing on Alvarado because he was their only high leverage lefty, because Soto is also a lefty.
Right.
So the makeup of the pen is kind of the same with Kimbrel gone, but Kirkering being the other righty, I guess you could kind of throw into the mix. I do think that's part of the reason why the price is low. Like if there was a statement that came out from the front office manager definitively, Jose Alvarado's the closer, we're going to use Alvarado as our closer, you'd see that ADP jump. Understandably so. I think that's what's holding him back right now. I think it's a risk worth taking in this range, though, because of all these guys, Leclerc, I don't think he's necessarily the clear-cut answer. He might have the job for now.
That to me, that's the story of like what bad command can do to you.
Yeah,
you can lose your job.
He's had some pretty gnarly injury problems as well, so he comes with elevated injury risk, a team with high expectations. They did bring in David Robertson as an insurance policy. I realize Robertson's going to be 39 in April, but he was pretty effective again last year. So I think they at least got somebody else that you could say has the proven closer tag.
Was great in the playoffs. And those playoff results for Sabores are actually more in line with the model expects of him. So, I kind of like Sabores as a sleeper. So I've taken some Leclerc, but I've usually tried to then take some Sabores to, in a draft and hold situation where I'm taking a couple shots at that pen. I think you can do this in a draft and hold situation. I think you can do something similar with Alex Lange, because I don't really love Alex Lange. He had the worst command of any of the closers last year. And I had a thing here. This is Alex Lange's sinkers against righties. You're trying to bury that pitch almost off the plate in. And Alex Lange got a lot of the middle of the plate with a sinker. And this is the heat map that you can look at on YouTube. So I think it's poor command, and it's a sinker-led arsenal. So when you look at what he does against lefties, he doesn't even bother throwing that sinker against them. He throws I think he threw last year 500 curveballs against lefties and 100 sinkers and 100 four-seamers. So that to me, that says there's a little bit of risk here, man. That's your approach. You're just gonna keep throwing the curveball over and over again. All right, maybe it'll work, but you can. I think it's fairly easy to see how to buy the two best candidates for saves in that bullpen by getting Alex Lange and Jason Foley, or Alex Lange and Shelby Miller. It's 3 guys that I think those 3 guys will get all the saves for the Tigers this year. So you can kind of buy your way through a pen, and they're all super cheap. So if you're kind of trying to do that thing where you handcuff a bunch of guys, Leclerc, you can kind of do it with Sabors and Robertson, I think. And I think you'll get most of the saves in that pen, but might be a little bit more expensive and might be a little bit worse.
Yeah, this whole tier is just full of question marks. Mason Miller, we know the stuff is just electric.
And they're putting him in the pen, so maybe it's easier for him to stay healthy.
I think at this point, aren't we at the that's not proven level? Yeah. You're still throwing really, really hard, so that's not necessarily going to keep you.
You can get away with an amazingly few amount of pitches. Like it's just fewer pitches. Like you can finish a day and then take 2 days off and have thrown 10 competitive pitches.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's got to be a little bit less likely to be injured. I think more pitches means more injury. I haven't seen this like disproven. Have you seen it disproven?
No,
it's just sort of thinking anecdotally, right?
It's just a thing that we think is true, but we don't have any proof.
We don't know for sure. Yeah.
Are the A's going to be a little better, like improved enough where if Mason Miller is their one closer that he could rack up 25 plus saves and be a tier 2 closer by season's end just by skills and opportunity? Is that in the range of outcomes?
I mean, the ERA is going to be tiny, and he's going to have a 30% strikeout rate. And if you look at some of the worst positions that the A's have, they're starting to gather guys there. So, Nick Allen as their shortstop, and we'll get to this on the team preview, but, they've got Daryl Hernandez like right behind him, and he hits the ball harder. So, in the outfield, they've got, Lawrence Butler behind JJ Bleday. So now they're starting to like gather enough options where they can be like, okay, sorry, this isn't working. We're going to the next guy, which I think offers some hope for them to be better this year.
I keep thinking that the best comp for Mason Miller is probably Pete Fairbanks.
Yeah.
Like what could go right is he's another Pete Fairbanks.
And also maybe the A's like give him all the save chances.
Right. They don't mess around at all. But then the other part of this too, I wonder how much they'll be careful with him on back-to-backs.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not worried about a lot of 3 in a rows.
Ryan Helsley for a long time like didn't pitch back-to-backs.
Right. So maybe you're just hoping for 15 saves given the team context and how he could be used. I don't think I've seen a specific usage plan for him. Maybe they'll just let him pitch like a regular reliever. It doesn't matter. If you throw 12 pitches one day, you can come back the next day and throw 15 or 20 more.
Yeah.
Tough call. Not a bin that I want to shop in for the most part. I'm with you on the concerns about Lange. I do think there's some intriguing paths for the Tigers to make a closer out of a failed starter. That could be something they do that would leapfrog the likes of Foley. We've seen Shelby Miller have some success. I just don't think
Alex Sawyer Gibson Long look like out of the pen might be exciting.
Yeah, we could be at that point. Matt Manning out of the pen, like that could happen theoretically, right? Like any one of those guys that doesn't win the job as a starter could move into a shorter relief role and just come out kind of electric. Bottom part of this group, Carlos Estévez. We talked about him a little bit last week when we mentioned that Robert Stevenson has been added to the Angels and
putting
that
a big fat void on a couple of these.
Yeah. So in the case where you just punted spending up early on saves, Carlos Estévez has the job on paper, according to his GM right now. It's not same as having the job on the field. The only question I have for you is it possible that Carlos Estévez was just unlucky on balls in play in his first season outside of Colorado? The stuff is actually pretty good. The fastball velocity is great. He should be better than he was last year. I had him on a few teams. I liked him as a cheap closer last year. Sierra kind of points to a number that says he deserved the 3.90 ERA. The 149 whip is just kind of strange to me. Like he shouldn't be this hittable with the arsenal that he has, right? So is this a little bit of an overlooked quality reliever because of how some things broke for him in his first season with the Angels?
Yeah, the one thing is that they've only got him for another year. They've got Stevenson for longer. There's no like, let's keep one guy cheap. Let's just have the veteran and keep the young guy who's better behind him. Like, there's none of that. Estévez and Stevenson are both on deals, and I just think Stevenson's better. So, I think they could have done fine with Estévez, and maybe signed like a Jordan Hicks or somebody to be a setup guy. But, since they signed Stevenson, I think they're looking to improve there. So I think at least in the GM's office, this was like, we're signing a closer on the cheap.
What a
I don't know what the manager's office is going to think. And I think they're going to give the manager some power. And we're also talking about a part of the draft where you're not very likely to have these players at the end of the season. So you're just taking a shot, and then you're just as likely to move on from that shot. So I could see doing it. For me, Kyle Finnegan is an avoid for the similar reason, which is that Hunter Harvey is just a better pitcher.
Yeah, I had the same thing on the notes on the rundown. I'm like, Hunter Harvey is better. We have 2 years approved. Hunter Harvey is better than Kyle Finnegan. And it's not to say Kyle Finnegan's bad, but if you're using the best reliever in that spot, it's Harvey's job to basically take over.
Yeah, and I guess there's some Mason Miller, Pete Fairbanks, extreme health risk with Hunter Harvey, and I think that's part of why they've mucked around with him a little bit to, because they're always, we can't use him back to back. How can you be our closer? So co-closers, I guess it is, but I'll take the one with the better strikeout rate, the better ERA, the better stuff, all that. Robert Suarez is the only one in this crew that I'm a little bit more excited to take a shot at. And, we've got a 3.84 projection and a 118 stuff plus. It's not amazing. But I just don't see them turning the ball over as in the closer role to the other options, unless like Woo-Suk Go or Yuki Matsui just have great springs and wow everybody. I suppose Suarez could take a back seat to one of the guys they got from Japan and Korea. But Suarez has the biggest fastball, and our preliminary research into this from Derek Carty and others is that fastball velocity matters just by itself outside of stuff. So you could have a guy who's throwing 98 in the closer role, or you could have one of these other guys who's like throwing 93, 94. I don't know. I think it's going to be Suarez.
I think health last year is a big part of the reason why the K rate took a little bit of a tumble for Robert Suarez. When he's healthy, he's electric. He makes the most money in that bullpen. He throws the hardest in that bullpen. Those things tend to nudge you into a ninth inning role. I would assume he at least gets the first shot at it. If you want to be really cynical about the money aspect, Robert Suarez has an opt-out after the 2025 season. He'll be pretty old. He'll be in his mid-30s, I think, by then. Maybe the Padres want to pump him up with saves just to get him to opt out of that deal so they don't have to pay for the last couple of years. So you're our guy. You're the closer. Just help him.
Get out there and see what you can do.
Yeah. We want to get you 40 saves these next 2 seasons so we can have you opt out. I mean, it's a good outcome for them if he's that good, too.
I think having the cynical mindset trying to play along with AJ Preller is probably a good idea.
Yeah, it seems like a good place to start. But I do like Suarez. I like Suarez more than the other 2 guys in the bottom part of the tier. But I actually think I like him a little more than everybody but Alvarado. I think Alvarado, I just know I'm taking on job risk. Suarez, I feel like I'm giving up a little bit of health and possible skills, even though the stuff looks like it's good enough for him to take the job and potentially run with it. Let's look beyond pick 250. So we have some teams. We haven't even talked about a reliever for, the Royals, for example. Favorite targets for saves, maybe don't currently have the job. Maybe they just haven't really been closers before, or they've only had opportunities for a couple of months. Who do you like in this space beyond pick 250? Who are some of your favorite darts right now to end up turning up value in this category?
Well, I can give you a couple that'll just be opportunities for the short term and won't be opportunities by the time if you're drafting in 3 weeks, like it'll be done. So, I mean, I think I'm looking at Hunter Harvey at 280.
Yep.
Robert Stevenson at 320. I just think those guys have a big up arrow on them. And as March proceeds, like we'll be talking about them in tier 3, and tier 2. But as long as they're there for me, easy pickings. I'll do the easy ones first.
Stevenson's already kind of made the leap to the early pick is 174, ADP the last 7 days
already
is 250. Happening. So yeah, he's pretty reasonably like part of the group we just talked about with an up arrow kind of point. Getting close to Alvarado might be where the toss up is. Like, hey, another guy with good skills. We're not sure if or when he's going to take over the role, but if he does, he'll be very good at it.
The closer they get to anointing one, and soon, like if they anoint Stevenson and Alvarado, I might actually take Stevenson because I could see him just being the sole closer, gets all of the saves, and the stuff since Robin Stevenson made his change to the cutter that he throws has been pretty outstanding. So
yeah,
I think. I have Gregory Santos as the closer in Chicago. I don't think it's going to be a good pen. I don't think it's going to be a good time in Chicago on the south side. He's also injured, so you kind of need him to, some positive health news. But I think as soon as he gets positive health news, he starts moving up. And he's a great late pick in drafting holds as a guy who, even if he doesn't close in April, I think he'll be closing the other 5 months. I don't really see anybody else in the pen I like.
Yeah, as long as he gets past the elbow injury. I'm a little worried about that injury because the last comment I saw was a RotoWire note pointing to Santos maybe not being ready for spring training, which, but you're right. Like the lack. But
even if he's not, like, what if he comes to spring training 2 weeks late? He's a reliever.
Yeah, they can catch up pretty fast.
Yeah.
We're not overlooking someone in this pen, are we? It's a long list of names, some former prospects in there.
We will have some analysis. I have a piece coming out tomorrow with Greg Jewett, who does the closer ranks at the Athletic, and he has a guy in there, but I'll let him speak for him because I'm not sure I'm in on him. I think is there like a bullpen? There might be 2 bullpens I'm just going to avoid completely.
Okay, which ones?
Kansas City and Colorado.
Colorado is like almost a permanent avoid for me. Like I just don't even want to deal.
We have a 4.57 ERA projected for Justin Lawrence with a 1.18 stuff plus. Like if he just went somewhere else. And James MacArthur, we have a 4.20 ERA projected with a 21% strikeout rate. And I couldn't really identify. I don't think I identified anybody deeper in that pen that I was like, oh yeah, like why not him? So
I don't think the Royals pen's a total avoid for me.
I do have one. I mean, our old favorite, Carlos Hernandez.
Yeah, well, sure. I'll never give up on Carlos
the last
Hernandez.
pick in a 50 round 15 team draft and hold. Like I like him, but like that's the level you should put Carlos Hernandez in your brain.
Oh, okay. So if you're in an AL only league and you have 6 reserves, he should be your 5th or 6th reserve. Okay?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Great use case.
We just helped 3 people.
Yeah, 2% of the audience might be in a situation where they can utilize Carlos Hernandez. So congratulations.
He also stashed that name away for later, and maybe the 12 teams.
That's true.
Maybe he starts setting up, and he's got better numbers than MacArthur, and then you're like, I'm actually going to believe this.
I do think with MacArthur, you look back, he really hasn't had a lot of time as a reliever. They just started using him predominantly as a reliever last year at AAA. So we're looking at about 40-ish appearances. He's got a lot of pitches, so you could kind of hone in on a couple more, like just have like 2 that stand out instead of the starter's arsenal that he used to work with.
Bryce being a reliever. Sometimes the more velo boost comes in the second year as a reliever. That's actually what you saw with Romano, as I was talking about. Romano went from 94.9 to 96.7 as a reliever.
Yeah, I'm trying to think when you look at that arsenal, I mean, 6.7. What does MacArthur throw that you think would play up? Like, does he have 2 good enough pitches to be a quality late inning option, even though he couldn't quite make it as a starter?
Let me see what we got here. MacArthur. James MacArthur, 4-seam fastball, 55 stuff plus. He doesn't throw it. Sinker, 91 stuff plus. Slider, 121. Curveball, 160. So it's a great curveball. Iffy sinker. I just think probably like a tick is what you're looking for.
Right.
Like if the velo is up in spring, I like him a little bit more.
Yeah, if he found it, I think that would be a good dart throw where he's going. If you don't believe in Tanner Scott, is Andrew Nardi the next guy up in the bullpen right now for the Marlins?
I've got Puck.
You still got Puck? I think they're trying to stretch him out. I don't know if I believe them. I don't really know why they would do that.
Yeah, unless they think of him as a double. I don't know. Yeah, that's something that spring will maybe bear fruit, but Just if everybody came back and was in the same roles, I would take Puck. I like him a little bit better than Nardi.
Are you taking a cheap shot in the Phillies bullpen then, since you're not really into Alvarado at the price?
Well, I love Orion Kerkering, but it's a little bit harder for me to identify who it is actually going to be if it's not Alvarado. So maybe that's an argument that it's Alvarado. But, Jeff Hoffman is, I think, an interesting name to pick.
Super, super cheap in a lot of leagues. If Pete Fairbanks breaks again, is there someone that stands out to you as the first choice to replace him in the race?
I think Jason Adam is my Jason Adam and Ryan Presley are my number one and number two guys in my non-closer tier. Mm-hmm. And the thinking is just they have excellent projections. They're going to be useful as pitchers, and the worst case scenario is not you get blown to smithereens in the first couple of weeks while you're trying to see if they get saves. The worst case scenario is you just rack up a few innings that are good, and then you move on if they're just not being used at all like that. The deeper the league gets, the more important it is that they're just a good reliever. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like in a draft and hold, I actually took Brian Abreu, because I was like, hey, there's going to be weeks where I don't have a good starting pitcher matchup. And I'm just going to put Abreu in there and hope he gets 3 appearances and 5 strikeouts and maybe a win.
Yeah, I think that works in that format, especially. You got to have the high stuff or the high K minus BB arms that you really like. And a lot of those guys end up being pitchers that if you play in a saves and holds league, those are the guys that are going to start to jump off the page. I mean, the consistent
Uribe.
Yeah, he's part of the bridge, like for sure. And if Williams gets hurt, he could end up being the
nasty. Where do they find these guys? They're so good at that.
It's an organizational gift, I guess.
Yeah, love it. You know that their player development is okay if they can come out with Hader and Devin Williams and Abner Uribe, even Piamps. It's a good pen.
Yep, they keep finding guys. Even the 6th and 7th inning guys end up being good.
And Rasmussen was theirs too. Rasmussen and who they trade with Rasmussen, the guy who just got traded again to the Kittredge.
Yeah,
those were Brewers.
Yeah, they've got that ability. So Uribe is a good call. Anyone else for saves plus holds leagues? I mean, you mentioned Brian Abreu. I'd love him in saves and holds leagues because he's just ratios, Ks, part of the bridge. They're going to win a lot. I mentioned the Mariners bullpen as one that's really good, right? I mean,
Matt Brash
seems like a great saves and holds league target because he could end up being the guy if Muñoz gets hurt. I think Muñoz has had a significant number of arm injuries to this point in his career.
I also just think he's like going to be a primary setup man. One of the things you do want with save plus holds leagues, because holds are more finicky even than saves. Managers don't get questioned about who their setup guy is as much, so they'll move guys around. Like nobody's asking them who's getting holds for you in the pregame scrum. So they'll be more finicky with those guys, and just getting a guy that you're like, that is the setup guy on a good team that's going to win a lot of games. I think that Brash fits that mold. DL Hall might fit that mold, but it's a little bit more hard. I think Julian Merriweather fits that mold. Mm-hmm. He's a good reliever on a team. He might get some saves. He might push. Adbert Alzolay, but I think he's at least the second best reliever right now on a pen that on a team that should win some games.
It's really funny. We did the same thing with the team saves leaderboard. I just looked at team holds. The Rockies only had 57 holds as a team last year. The team that led the league was the Orioles at 106. There were 6 teams that had 100 or more. Wow. Orioles, Jays, Brewers, Guardians, Tigers, Braves, and then the Mariners are up there at 96.
Because the tough thing about getting 2 into DL Hall is Yamir Cano is there too, and so he might just be the setup guy, especially since he's got such a great sinker and keeps the ball on the ground and seems so safe. So, how many games will Hall come up in a Hall situation? I think there's probably a fair amount, but Ian Hamilton is a guy that I like in New York. Especially with Jonathan Loizaga's injury history, Ian Hamilton could end up moving into setup.
Yeah. Good group of targets, though, all around for the saves and holds league. Some of them could be future closers. Some of them may just stay 7th, 8th inning the entire time and be helpful in that one particular format. You mentioned a piece you're writing with Greg Jewett. That'll be up on The Athletic on Friday. So that'll be really cool. Greg does great work on closers. So hopefully you've been reading him over the last couple of seasons. And if you don't have access to The Athletic, you can get it for $2 a month. theathletic.com/rates and barrels. It's an offer for new subscribers only. So be sure to take advantage of that if you are eligible to do so. What else you got coming up? Got anything else?
Well, I've got the dueling closing ranks. I've got chats on Fridays are back. So
Nice.
We've got chats at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. We are going to have some fun, more announcements for this podcast coming. And then last night, as again, the cat twice, each dog separately, and I was so tired. I'm mad at my animals right now. But while I was falling asleep, I had the idea to maybe write a story about the death of Dips theory.
Oh.
So there's been some interesting findings that I've talked about on this podcast with regards to the fact that pitchers cannot control the ball and results on balls in play, and may go through the history of that. So I have some people to contact and some thinking to do. But maybe that'll be up next week on the pages of The Athletic.
Well, you should give your cat co-author credit for an inspiration for the idea. And good
Not giving that cat anything. I'll give him food, but just grudgingly.
You still have the option of kindly rehoming the cat. I offer that to you all the time. Like, hey, you're not a bad person.
Unfortunately,
if you move on
it's
from
like
the cat.
kind of my father-in-law's cat. So,
oh well, like.
Yeah,
have him
he
take
can
it
take
home.
him back. Yeah,
Problem solved.
I think he would like San Diego better. Oh yes, we'll talk about how much he's been inside because it's rainy and cold, and how he'd much rather be outside.
You did it. You solved the cat problem.
Ooh, a little internal family politics, a little massaging the decision. No, would you guys like to take him?
Yeah, you have to just make the cat act on its best behavior before you make the request. So that's going to take some work. So we'll give you some time to work on that. No show on Friday. Plenty of time to catch up on all the position previews. We're glad we got all those out nice and early this year. We appreciate everybody who's taking the time to listen to those, to drop comments on YouTube. Those are always great. You can email us, ratesandbarrels@gmail.com is the best way to contact us with questions for future episodes. As we mentioned before, we're going to get into some deep pitchers and hitters at various points in the next few weeks. So if you got specific questions, send those our way. But we're also going to have some broader focus on the guys we didn't get to. And team previews are coming up soon. So that's a new thing for us this year as well. So that is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Monday.
Thanks for listening.